My daughter's boyfriend killed her. He chopped her head off.
The construction worker arrived at the job site just after dawn, carrying sheets of old drywall toward the red dumpster parked on the quiet residential street. He tossed the debris inside and was about to walk away when something caught his eye. A serrated knife, blade and handle both covered in blood. Around it lay scattered women's clothing. He backed away slowly, his hands shaking. Something terrible had happened here. Less than 3 hours later, a mother named Heidi pulled up to her daughter's apartment building. 22-year-old Lisa, 8 months pregnant, hadn't answered texts or calls in over 15 hours. Heidi used the entry code and climbed to the second floor. The apartment door was unlocked. She pushed it open and walked toward the bedroom. 2 minutes later, she stumbled back outside, visibly shaking, her face drained of color. She collapsed onto the front steps and dialed 911 with trembling fingers.
My daughter's boyfriend killed her. He chopped her head off.
Are you outside the apartment right now?
Yes, yes.
What kind of a weapon does he have?
He's not here. He took her car.
Okay, now officers are coming. So you haven't heard from her boyfriend or talked to him at all?
No, I haven't.
First responders arrived within minutes to find a scene of unimaginable brutality. Lisa's body lay in her bedroom, a towel wrapped around her neck like a turban. Beneath it, her head was gone, completely severed from her body. There was no murder weapon. There was no sign of the killer. And there was no head. Someone had taken it with them. The bedroom showed signs of a violent struggle, but the rest of the apartment was eerily orderly, as if the killer had taken time to clean up after committing an act of almost medieval savagery. The CCTV footage told the story that Lisa could not. At 9:11 p.m. the previous night, she and her boyfriend DeAndre Holloway had returned to the apartment together. For the next 2.5 hours, nothing appeared on camera. Then, at 11:57 p.m., DeAndre emerged from the building carrying a white laundry basket. He walked to Lisa's car but didn't get in. He'd forgotten the keys. He went back inside. Minutes later, he reappeared with the same basket, now wearing different clothes, dark shoes, and a face covering. He walked out of frame toward a smoke shop, behind which sat a large dumpster. Security footage from a nearby business captured the rest. At 12:01 a.m., the white basket was thrown into the dumpster along with blood-soaked clothing. Inside that basket was Lisa's severed head. By 2:30 a.m., Lisa's car was gone from the parking lot, and DeAndre was banging on his mother's door across town, pacing frantically, his eyes wild with panic. But the real horror had unfolded hours earlier, between 9:11 p.m. and midnight, inside that second-floor apartment. The neighbors who lived directly below Lisa and DeAndre had heard it all. They arrived home around 9:30 p.m. to find Lisa's front door cracked open, unusual for a couple who always kept it closed. Inside, they could hear muffled yelling, not quite screaming, but anguished, like someone in pain trying to stifle their cries. Then the apartment above them began to shake. Heavy movement, the sounds of a violent struggle. The neighbor and her boyfriend froze, listening, debating whether to call the police or wait to see if it would stop. Then the screaming started, loud, desperate, intensifying with each second. What came next would haunt them for the rest of their lives. 5 or 6 loud thuds shook the ceiling above them. Each one was deliberate, rhythmic, separated by just enough time for someone to raise something heavy and bring it down with full force. The neighbor would later tell police it sounded like chopping wood, steady, measured impacts that required commitment and strength. Thud, pause, thud, pause, thud. Each one reverberated through the building. And then, after the 6th impact, everything stopped. The screaming cut off mid-breath. The shaking ceased. Complete silence descended over the apartment. The neighbor stood frozen in terror, unable to process what her brain was telling her she'd just heard. Someone had been murdered directly above her head. She heard footsteps walk outside onto the deck and return 2 minutes later. The lights in Lisa's apartment continued flickering on and off for the next hour, indicating someone was moving around up there. Her texted her landlord. "We got home and started feeling thumps, then someone started screaming for like 5 minutes straight. It stopped for a minute, then the thumping started back up. The neighbor's door upstairs was also cracked open. The landlord tried contacting Lisa but got no response. The neighbor wrote back, 'If we hear it start up again, we'll call the cops.' But they never heard it start again because it was already over. Lisa was already dead, and DeAndre was already dismembering her body. The relationship between Lisa and DeAndre had been a slow-motion tragedy unfolding for nearly 2 years. Her co-workers at Dairy Queen had witnessed the abuse firsthand, the black eyes she initially blamed on her dog, the bruises on her arms that looked like finger marks, the time DeAndre punched her in the face while she sat in the passenger seat of a car in the parking lot. Lisa's manager had watched it happen on security cameras, though the footage quality was too poor to serve as evidence. Lisa returned to work that day with her face red and swollen. When confronted, she admitted they'd been fighting. She always went back to him. In July 2021, she'd been hospitalized with a broken nose and 2 black eyes. In September, she'd texted her boss, "My boyfriend beat me again and I had to go to my mom's. They're wanting me to stay in a safe place because he's threatened to harm us." Yet within days, she was back with DeAndre. The cycle continued, predictable and horrifying, escalating with each rotation. DeAndre's own mental state had been deteriorating for months. His family had tried for years to get him help, but the mental health system wouldn't intervene without a crime or acute crisis. On June 7th, 2 days before the murder, DeAndre disappeared without explanation. Lisa came home from work to find him gone, some of his clothes missing, his phone left behind. She was frantic, texting her mother, "You think he'd just leave like this?" "I think I got left." Her mother tried to comfort her, even suggesting this might be a blessing, a non-violent way out of a toxic relationship. But Lisa couldn't see it that way yet. The next evening, June 8th, DeAndre's uncle sent a message saying he was bringing DeAndre home. Lisa went to pick him up herself, ignoring her mother's warnings to be careful. The security cameras captured them arriving at 9:11 p.m. Lisa texted her mother from the car, "I'm trying to figure it out." Those were the last words she would ever send. Within minutes of entering the apartment, the argument began. What was said between them in those final moments? What trigger was pulled in DeAndre's mind? What escalation transformed anger into murder? These answers died with Lisa. But what the neighbors heard through the floor told the physical story clearly enough. The muffled arguing became violent struggling. The struggling became screaming. And the screaming ended with the methodical sound of something being severed, stroke by stroke, with a serrated blade. After killing Lisa and decapitating her corpse, DeAndre spent the next 2 hours systematically covering his tracks. He changed out of his blood-soaked clothes, wrapped his face to avoid recognition, and carried Lisa's severed head in a laundry basket to the dumpster behind the smoke shop. He disposed of the murder weapon, the clothing, and any other evidence he could remove from the scene. He then took Lisa's car and drove to his mother's house, arriving at 2:30 a.m., nervous and agitated, banging on the door until someone let him in. His sister, who was awake watching Netflix, saw him arrive and noticed Lisa's black car parked in the driveway. It struck her as odd that DeAndre would show up alone in his girlfriend's vehicle in the middle of the night. The next morning, DeAndre's family noticed his strange behavior immediately. He was cutting off his dreadlocks, hair he hadn't cut in 2 years, and was extremely proud of. When his half-sister asked why, he said only, "fresh start." His grandmother watched him wrap the cut dreadlocks in toilet paper and throw them in the trash outside. He showered and asked his mother for clean clothes. She gave him gray sweatpants and a shirt. He took his old clothes, a blue bucket hat, a hoodie, and pants, and placed them by the trash can on the sidewalk before eventually throwing them away completely. His grandmother noticed he had Lisa's identification card, debit card, and keys. When she asked why he had his girlfriend's belongings, DeAndre had no answer. He just stared blankly, looking dissociated and confused. His grandmother took the items, planning to return them to Lisa, not knowing Lisa was already lying headless in her apartment. By midday, DeAndre left his mother's house on foot, mumbling something about cutting grass. His family was becoming increasingly suspicious. His behavior was erratic, nervous, guilty. But they didn't know the full extent of what he'd done. That revelation came hours later, when police executed a search warrant on the house and found all the evidence DeAndre had tried to dispose of: the bloody clothing, the cut hair, everything that placed him at the scene during the murder. By then, DeAndre was already in custody in a neighboring town, arrested that afternoon for cannabis possession. He refused to identify himself, paced frantically despite being handcuffed, and at one point began slamming his head against the wall until officers physically restrained him on the ground. When Alton Police Department investigators arrived and identified him as their murder suspect, DeAndre went completely silent. He refused to answer any questions, refused even to confirm his name, and eventually asked for a lawyer. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The CCTV footage showed him disposing of evidence in the middle of the night. The clothing found in his mother's trash matched what he was wearing in the video. The knife discovered in the dumpster that morning had both his and Lisa's DNA on it. Lisa's head was recovered from the same dumpster, hidden beneath construction debris. Neighbors testified to hearing the murder happen in real time, their descriptions of the sounds matching perfectly with the injuries found on Lisa's body. DeAndre's own family provided statements about his suspicious behavior in the hours after the killing. There was no defense, no plausible alternative explanation. He had murdered Lisa, decapitated her corpse, and attempted to cover up the crime. On June 13th, DeAndre was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, one for Lisa and one for her unborn daughter, along with charges for concealment of a homicide, desecration of a human body, and motor vehicle offenses. His bond was set at $2 million. In jail, he continued to be violent and unstable, refusing to leave his cell and threatening corrections officers, at one point telling them, "I will cut off your head," the same thing he had done to Lisa. He was found mentally unfit to stand trial and underwent treatment at a state institution. But in January 2024, he entered a guilty plea, finally accepting responsibility for what he had done. At his sentencing in January 2025, Lisa's mother, Heidi, delivered a statement that left the courtroom in stunned silence. She thanked law enforcement for their work. She spoke about the 2-year pattern of domestic violence that led to this moment. She addressed anyone currently trapped in an abusive relationship. If someone threatens to end your life, believe them. If they can say it, think it, and talk about it, they can carry out the threat. Your life depends on leaving. She acknowledged DeAndre's mental illness, but made clear it didn't absolve him of responsibility. And she shared a heartbreaking detail discovered by investigators. Lisa's hand had been resting on a book about pregnancy when she died, suggesting her final thought was of the daughter she would never meet. DeAndre was sentenced to 60 years, 30 for murder, 20 for the homicide of the unborn child, and 10 for concealment, all consecutive. He would have to serve at least 52 years before parole eligibility, meaning he would be in his 70s before having any chance of freedom.